Love that. That's my backyard hawk.
All right. We're hot. We're recording.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Almost all of America.
Yeah.
South Dakota is now off the list.
Oh.
So we're down to two.
North Dakota and Alaska?
North Dakota and Alaska.
Ain't that a kick in the balls?
Supposedly there's a feeler out to a connection in Alaska. Maybe that'll change over. And like I said, the way that reporting works, I don't know what the turnaround time is on it. Because like I said, that Mississippi stuff kind of came in like 2 or 3 weeks later after you said you talked to your kinfolk. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe it takes that long for everything to report up. Well, shall we go ahead and roll some music and wait on our guest to call in?
Let's do it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to ShiftLess, the podcast about bicycles, dogs, movies,
sometimes food,
music, whiskey,
opinions,
and bicycles. We are hanging out.
Man, what about this weather?
At Chateau de Green. In finally some fantastic weather. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's been pretty good for a little bit now.
It's borderline jacket on.
Yeah, jacket is on at the moment.
Yeah.
But that was a just in case thing. It was like better to have the jacket on and then take the jacket off if needed.
Yeah, later on it'll be jacket off weather.
It will be jacket off later. There's probably not too far down the road, quite frankly, later today.
Yeah, it's supposed to be in the 80s today. It was beautiful yesterday. So.
Well, we're waiting on a phone call. We think we have a guest today. Should have heard from them by now. I'm actually going to send a quick email just to make sure we're still on. And we can edit this as needed. Yeah, I can't type on this thing for shit.
Has nothing to do with it being an Android.
Email is sent, so we'll see if we get a reply or a response. And I wasn't really prepared for us to talk about anything today, so I don't even know where to go with them. Okay, so you did BT Epic last week, and it was epic?
I did not race BT Epic.
You did BT Epic, though.
I did BT Epic.
Or did the BT Epic do you?
No, I did it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was cool just supporting and hanging out and, like, cheering people on. Got to see a couple of different aspects of the race, the course, and a little bit of behind the scenes. So it was cool. Always a huge, just awesome vibe there. Good vendors. I got myself a new Kuat belt. It's 2 for my collection now.
Okay. What color is this one?
Blue.
Okay.
Got the full lowdown on the new, the Piston Pro Kuat rack. I was impressed. The girl that was there, that was kind of the show and tell girl, she knew her stuff. Like, I mean, obviously it's her job, but I was impressed. Like, I had a couple of questions even after she gave her, like, walkthrough and spill and stuff. And pretty impressive. But those racks are not cheap. But very cool. All the bells and whistles. The one that they were showcasing was the one that has the tail lights on it, the integrated tail lights and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That thing is a beast. I like how it's got an integrated lock, and there's a couple of things that are really cool about it. But you can swivel it away. I think that's an add-on. It is an add-on.
What's the price point for that one? Do you remember?
$13.98.
I'm about to say I thought it was like over $1,200 if I remember correctly.
Yeah, without the lights and the Kashima coating, which I don't understand the need for a Kashima coating anyway.
Just like titanium springs, just to say you got it.
Yeah, but Kashima's supposed to be smoother and last longer for like travel on your suspension.
I get that.
You know, that's a hardened coating, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like you need it on a rack.
We're into that form versus function realm.
Yeah.
That's a lot of form there.
So, but the thing is, you can't get the light kit without the Kashima coating.
Sure.
So it's kind of a package deal, you
Yeah,
know.
it's-
You gotta
I mean-
pay. You gotta pay for the undercoat.
Well, and it's not even the undercoat. It's like, oh, you want the off-road package for that Silverado.
Yeah.
Well, you have to get the moonroof and the leather
Yeah.
and everything, or whatever else.
Yeah.
They're only going to put that package on the trucks that have everything else.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Well, without the Kashima and the light package, I think it's $10.98. So still 1100,
Sure.
but it knocks $300 off. So that's considerable, but
Understood.
still.
Understood. And for people that's the right product for, fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't see that it fits my use case for anything, but I don't that's not me knocking the product. I love Kuat products, so I mean they put that together because it's the right fit for somebody.
I think the next bike rack I'm gonna even entertain is gonna be a vertical bike rack.
I've thought about that. Oh, there we go.
Call from
Mark Stevenson.
Hey, Mark.
Good morning. How are you guys doing?
Man, just loving this weather.
Yeah, it's good down there, huh?
Oh, it's beautiful this morning. It's in the 60s right now, 50s even maybe.
How is the weather up in Iowa today, Mark?
Well, it's cloudy today, but, you know, it's perfect fall weather here.
Where are you located in Iowa?
Well, I think most people would recognize Waterloo as being the place where John Deere tractors come from.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at.
I got you.
Yeah, northeast Iowa. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, let me do a quick introduction before we get too deep into this. Let our listeners know who we have on board with us today, and I'm very excited by this. We have the world famous, the OG, Guitar Ted, aka Mark Stevenson, on board with us. Do you prefer Mark or Guitar Ted when we're talking to each other?
I go by. Yeah, but some people shorten the Guitar Ted part to GT, you know, so whatever you guys feel comfortable with, Mark, it's fine. So, yeah.
Well, I like GT. I used to have a Mustang GT.
Yeah, there you go.
But GT, we're going to go with Ted. We're going to go with Ted. Like I said, he's the OG gravel influencer. For those that may not be familiar with it, back in the day, before there was what we recognize as social media now, but the internet was definitely a thing, Guitar Ted was one of the premier resources, if not the premier resource for things related to gravel, but even going further back than that, an amazing resource for 29ers and single speed stuff. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So I hopped on the old internet back when everybody was getting PCs around, what was that, 1999, 2000. And, you know, was interested in this thing I read about in Dirt Rag magazine, which was one of my favorite mountain bike publications back in the day.
R.I.P.
Yeah, right. And they were talking about 29ers, you know, in 1999, this bigger wheel size, and I got really interested in it. I thought, well, you know, we got these newfangled information highway machines, so let's see what they can tell me about 29ers. So became very interested in that and, you know, started interacting with people who were like me, that were interested in them, and sooner or later learned enough about them that was something I decided I wanted. And so when Shirley came out with their Karate Monkey in 2003, I jumped on board and was enamored of the way they work and went on from there.
And the Karate Monkey's still a great choice. That's been a rock solid bike for 20 plus years.
And it's definitely evolved with the times too. You wouldn't recognize my 2003 Karate Monkey as being that bike anymore, but yeah.
Yeah, I have a Karate Monkey built up currently, and I love it.
What year's yours, Brad?
Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Mine's the newest model. It's
so a 23 or a 22 or?
I think it's either 23 or I don't think it's a 24. It's the Peach what is it, peach salmon sundae color.
Oh yeah, those are cool. Yeah.
So going back to that iteration of the information superhighway, is that where Guitar Ted came from? Was that like a forum handle or something, or what's the origins of Guitar Ted?
Well, you're on the right track. So, but we got to go back further in the 70s, back when I was coming up as a teenager, and my dad worked in a factory, and they made tractors up here in Iowa, and in my little town I grew up in, Charles City, and my dad always preached to us that you should buy American. All these foreign-made products aren't helping us out. And, you can go down that highway and if you want to, but that's how it was then. So I was trying to please my dad by, buying as much American stuff as I could get my hands on. So that included my music, right? So as I was digging through the record bin and the department store back in the 70s, I heard this sweet, sultry sounds of Ted Nugent and decided that he was from Detroit. Well, that would work. So I got to be a big fan of his music in the 70s, and my high school mates started calling me Ted Head because that's all I listened to was Ted Nugent, and that name stuck with me. And when the internet came along, you had to sign up with a handle and a lot of these forums and such, and so I tried to use that name, but it was always taken, so I thought, well, I play guitar, so I'll just call myself Guitar Ted, and that worked. So that's where that came from.
The Motor City Madman.
Yeah, that's not what I would have guessed.
No, I had never heard that story before. I'm glad I asked that. And Ted / Mark, I don't know where to go with this, but I don't know how familiar you are with the show you're on now, ShiftLess, featuring Chef Brad Green and myself. But just to give you a little bit of perspective, we wholeheartedly embrace that we are idiots and don't know much about what we're talking about. So when we occasionally come up with a topic, it's like, we've got opinions on this, but they're probably just worth what our opinions are worth, which isn't much. Every once in a while we say maybe we should bring an expert on board to help sort us through this and give us a better perspective and help educate us. And there's been a host of topics that Brad and I have spoken about. We're on episode 32 now, right, Brad?
It seems right.
There's been a bunch of things that we've spoken about to each other that we obviously don't really know what we're talking about. I'm hoping you might be able to enlighten us on maybe not the in-depth, but on some of the surface level issues that we've struggled with. And if you have opinions or information on it, it'd be greatly appreciated. And if you don't, hey, you can just be like us and just make up bullshit. We're okay with that.
All right.
Now, one, and to be honest with you, a consistent theme of Brad and mine's conversation is that we kind of fall back on what a lot of the kids call retro grouch mode these days.
Okay.
We do come from the steel is real background, both of us. We're fans of the single speed life. We think mountain bikes don't have to have 6 inches of suspension up front and back.
Right.
And the e-bike is, it's out there. It does its thing, and we're not going to judge anyone else. But right now, neither Brad nor myself have an e-bike in our stables, and I don't see it being a priority for either of us.
I almost rode one this weekend.
Did you almost ride one?
Yeah.
I would like to ride one.
At BT Epic, Aston had his blingy e-bike there, and he had brought it.
Aston synonymous with blingy?
Yeah, pretty much. But he was like, you should ride this tomorrow, and I was like, ooh, I don't want to fall in love. I know me.
Yeah.
But it did have an easy button.
Yeah, it does have an easy button.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, Mark, the the topic that has kind of been consistent with this the past few episodes that I really thought your input could help my understanding of things. Going back to the steel is real, and we touched on Surly already. I mean, obviously the cross check is essentially no more.
Right.
All City is fading out after their next batch sells out. I have opinions about the status of steel bikes in the bike industry, particularly in mountain bikes and gravel. I'm just curious, what do you see as the future of steel? Is steel? I mean, I know it's not going to go away, but it doesn't look like it's a high demand item, or am I imagining things? What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, probably might be beneficial for me to tell your listeners as well that I've been in the bike industry for 30 years of my career and worked in shops, and I know a lot of people in the industry, so my take on it comes from that viewpoint. So I would say that, first of all, I think what a lot of people, just your average bicycle customer, sees steel as being heavy. Okay, because that's kind of been the mantra of the bike industry, is you want to buy a bike that's light. So number one, steel comes from a perception of being heavy.
I get that.
And that's kind of reinforced. That's reinforced a lot of times by the average consumer's experience with big box brand bike store stuff, like Walmart and Target, and
Yeah.
they buy a steel bike from there and they weigh a metric ton, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And that's their experience. And so they come into a bike shop and, they're wowed by the carbon fiber, they're wowed by the lightweight aluminum, and their perception is that's the kind of bike they really want, because they want to get away from that real boat anchor bike that they were used to, or they had it when they were a kid. So that's number one. Number two, going against steel, the thing that's going against steel is it's not necessarily the most inexpensive material to use for the bike industry. So the bike industry in the Far East is set up to make mass-produced aluminum frames cheaply.
Yeah.
So they're not set up to make steel frames cheaply. So steel, there's only a couple of factories that really make decent steel frames. And out of those factories, they're maxed out with capacity, making stuff for Surly, making stuff for the other bike brands that still do steel, and they're because the demand is high on those factories, the prices for the frames are expensive. So they're not necessarily the cheapest option either. You can get an aluminum frame for way less in the industry. So it makes more sense from that standpoint on a price point level. If you're trying to hit the entry level in the bike business, you're not going to make a steel bike. Your steel bike's going to end up being like a mid-level choice, and that kind of throws people for a loop in the bike shop too, because they're looking at, well, I can get this, hybrid bike for $600, and you're telling me this steel bike's going to cost me $1,300, and it's heavier, right? So those two things in combination work against steel in the industry to make it not as sexy as a choice for the average consumer. Now, it's kind of like whiskey. You go in and you buy Old Crow whiskey, that's fine, I just want to get drunk. But if you really like whiskey, you go in and buy the $40 bottle of whiskey that's been aged for 8 years, and you know that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you've got a level of understanding of whiskey that makes you not want to buy the cheap stuff anymore. Whereas the average person, well, it's whiskey, I just want to get drunk, and I don't care what it tastes like, because it tastes like gasoline no matter what I do. So I think there's a little bit of that going on too with the average person. Your steel consumer is going to be the guy who's ridden a few bikes, kind of knows what he wants, knows what they can do, and is willing to spend the money. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the way I see it.
Makes all the sense in the world. I got a little distracted there trying to run the equipment and hit the wrong buttons. So we'll edit that part out. So first off, is Old Crow still a thing?
Oh, yeah.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah.
I have not seen that in forever.
That and Old Granddad. I had a couple of bottles of Old Granddad 114, which is actually pretty good.
That's actually not That's not bad.
That's not bad. But
Way back in the day, my grandparents owned a liquor store in Coffeyville, Kansas, and their house was all Old Crow accessories. And I would love to have all of that stuff, but somewhere along the way it disappeared.
yeah,
So anyway,
I think Old Crow is Heaven Hill.
the current steel bike industry. What I was trying to explain to Brad last week is my thoughts are that steel's almost going to become a boutique thing, in my opinion, going forward. Yes, Surly's going to still be around. Surly will, well, I hope they will anyway.
Yeah.
Surly's going to still be around, but my guess is that pretty much most of the steel market is going to be going custom in the coming years. Or am I just being too negative on the potential for steel going forward?
No, I think you're right. I mean, it seems like a lot of the boutique companies, little one-off people are still, building steel frames. That seems to be where most of the steel frames are in the market nowadays, is one-off companies, and then like your Surly's. Now that All City's gone, I can't think offhand of anybody else that makes an off-the-shelf decent mid-level steel frame.
State.
Yeah, but I don't ever see them around here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Are you up to speed on the State stuff, Mark? Do you have any opinion?
Yeah, I've actually reviewed one of their bikes, that single-speed gravel bike they had out a couple of years ago. It's nice stuff, for a decent price. Obviously, there's different companies, smaller companies that specialize in stuff like that a lot of people may not know about. State Bicycle's kind of trying to make a name for themselves, and they've got a marketing company that's very pushing the brand now, and I think that they have the potential to gain some market share because of the All City thing going away, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, they're making a big push into the gravel scene with their accessories. They have a gravel suspension fork now, and so they're I think they're cognizant over there of what's happening, and they're trying to gain a foothold in that, where there's going to be a void like you guys are talking about.
Yeah.
But what I want to kind of bring out here is, let's go back to 1999, 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Surly first started.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, the bike industry, there wasn't a steel brand.
Good
if
point.
you remember.
Yeah.
So, and steel had been the domain of mountain bikes for years, because that's kind of where mountain bikes came out of, was the custom builders who used steel, kind of like to your point that you made earlier about how that's kind of the domain of the custom builder. And that's because steel is easier to work with.
Absolutely.
You don't need special tooling. You don't need to age and heat treat a steel frame like you would an aluminum one, which adds extra steps and more complexity and expense on a small scale. It's almost impossible to do that. And titanium is very expensive to work with. It requires special tooling and whatnot. So the steel bicycle is perfect for the custom builder. So that's why you see so many use that material. But in the 90s, the early 90s, all your mountain bikes were steel. Then it kind of started becoming an aluminum thing.
Yeah.
And by the end of the decade, the Far East had set up aluminum frame production and was just killing the prices that steel bikes went for, undercutting them. And so all the big brands went to aluminum. So like your Treks that used to be made in Waterloo, Wisconsin, or Whitewater, Wisconsin, they had a big factory up there, made steel bikes up until about 2000. Boom, they went to Taiwan.
Yeah.
And started making everything aluminum. So right about then, when Surly first started coming around, was when everything swapped over to aluminum from steel. So let's say Surly never existed. Where would we be today? Well, we'd be where you're saying we're going to go, is steel would have been the domain of the custom builder and the small brand.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't even know about, a lot of things that were steel bikes that made us, happy and glad to have a steel bike.
Sure.
So I don't know, there's a potential there. If Surly hadn't hadn't gained a foothold, that we may be talking a different story altogether today.
That's a good point. But that said, now I never became an All City customer, but I liked the direction their stuff.
It made me happy to know what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that it seemed like a good niche to me. Now there was a little bit of a crossover there where that when All City came about, they were kind of similar to State, and it's a low cost brand, and they added features and so forth, and it got to the point where, well, that's a nice steel bike, but they're going for the same price as a mid-level carbon bike.
Yeah, they started getting a little too big for their britches too quick, is what it seemed to me.
Seemed like, but what did with your industry contacts or your perceptions of things, Mark? Is that part of what happened with All City, or just steel isn't a viable material at that level?
Yeah, I think, one of the things is All City tried to forge its identity by having details of their frame stand out. So, like, you look at their dropouts with the bridge that looks like a bridge, or the cast dropouts as they had on some of their disc bike frames. Then when you make a steel bike, you can only do so much with the tubing.
Yeah.
You can't form it like you can aluminum, make it look weird. You can't do the things like you can do with carbon fiber to get a different look, so it catches a consumer's eye. Almost all steel frames basically essentially look the same. They're round tubes, so it's the details that matter on a steel frame. So All City went after that, and they went after it with paint. They had expensive powder coat that most of the industry wasn't using. So, because they had proprietary bits and pieces to their frames, and because of the paint that they decided, a powder coat they decided to use, they ended up at a price point that was above Surly, and like you said, especially through the 2000s, the late 2000s, early 2010s, a lot of their bikes were priced at what a entry-level carbon frame would go for. So then you look at that, and the consumer perception is, like we said, steel's heavy, carbon's light, I want the light bike, so it gets to be kind of a hard sell at a bike shop level when you're trying to talk to consumers who are looking at that time would have been, a $1,200 to $2,200 bike, and which one you're going to buy. Well, you're probably going to buy the carbon one with the Sora 9-speed or a, Tiagra on it versus All City that might have had 105 on it,
You touched on another popular topic of Retro Grouch Brad and myself's regular routine, proprietary, and something we just bash our heads against the wall every week on is the lack of standards anymore, where basically the current standard is what's the new standard.
I think you mean the abundance of standards, not the lack of standards.
Yeah, right.
Or
That's a good way to put it, Brad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in full Retro Grouch mode, but I miss the day where I could just get a new frame and just pull my old bits off other bikes or borrow something from a friend or whatever, and hey, I've got a new bike. I can't keep up with what fits my bike now, sort of thing. So if I'm wanting to get a new part, I'm almost at the point I have to go to the bike shop and say, order me what fits for this bike. Now, make no mistake, I'm a huge fan of using my local shop, and that's one of the reasons, talking about State, for example. I like their products, but I really think, particularly at that price point, most of the people that are in the market for an entry-level bike are better served to work with a local shop, is my general perception on things. Man, I just opened up a whole can of worms going from one question to a completely different direction there. Let's go. Let's go back to the lack of standards or abundance of standards or proprietary. That's is there any chance of that getting any better, or is that going to get worse going forward?
Well, the thing I like to remind people of, or inform people of, because a lot of people have no idea, is that the bicycle industry never has had consistent standards. they've always had an abundance of standards. So I go back to when I first became a bike mechanic in 1993, and the shop I worked at had a machinist cabinet that was like 6 drawers wide and 6 drawers from the top to the bottom, and all of the drawers were filled with different lengths of chromoly bottom bracket spindles.
Oh, yeah.
That's all that cabinet was.
Yeah.
And so, you can do the math and figure out how many different lengths of bottom bracket spindles there were. Then he had another machinist cabinet that had all the bottom bracket cups, because back then bottom brackets were serviceable, so you had all the different component parts of the bottom bracket.
Mark, you and I are from the same background. I worked in a very similar shop, just aisles and aisles of ball bearings and cups and races and everything. Yeah.
And if you think about those cups, they had to be BSA standard, Italian standard, Swiss.
Yep.
There were 3 or 4 different weddings that you had to have French. So you had to have those 4 and all the different lengths of spindles and all the different cups, and then the ball bearings that went in them, and then you could put a bottom bracket together. So that's just bottom bracket.
Yeah.
You could talk about headsets and all that other stuff too. So it's never been an industry that said, hey, can we just condense this down to BSA standard for bottom brackets? Just go with that? No.
Right.
We got to have all these things. So the bicycle business has never been on board with a consistent standard for a component. So with that said, then you move into marketing. So a lot of what happens here is marketing driven. So and that goes back to what Schwinn did in the 50s and 60s. So Schwinn, seeing that they had competition that they wanted to defeat, they decided that, well, to get consumers not only to buy a Schwinn, but to stick with Schwinn for their maintenance, we're going to change things so they can only get it from Schwinn. So if you remember, Brad, back in your bike shop days, there were S7 tires, and there were different ISO diameter 26-inch tires that only fit Schwinn rims.
Yeah, I actually worked at a Schwinn shop.
So if you bought a Schwinn, you couldn't go to the coast to coast. You couldn't go to your local bike shop and get a tire because they wouldn't have it. You had to go to the Schwinn approved shop.
Yeah.
So the rest of the industry saw that and went, hey, that's a brilliant idea. Yeah. So brilliant for business, not so much for consumers. So then you get into where, this company has their bottom bracket, and this company has a different idea for a bottom bracket, and so on and so forth. And then you get into, it gets crazy, and right. So that's where we're at today. Yeah. A lot of this stuff becomes proprietary because they want you to buy into their marketing idea that we figured a better mousetrap out, and this is why. Yeah. And and consumers, being what consumers are, tend to believe certain things that may not necessarily be the greatest thing to believe, and go for it. So then we, as mechanics and bike shop nerds and bicycle nerds, go, hey, man, what's up with this? This is driving us nuts.
What's wrong with square taper bottom bracket? What's wrong with square taper?
So, and it's maddening as a mechanic. So I'm sure it's maddening for you guys, but as a mechanic, it's super maddening because every year you have to go out and spend about $100 to $150 on new tools for the new stuff that's coming out.
Yeah.
And it's worse now because you have e-bikes and you have hydraulic brakes and you've got electronics. Yeah. I mean, I know bike mechanics now, they're investing in electronic stuff so they can diagnose the e-bikes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's getting to the point where, to be a mechanic and work at the wage that they get is almost impossible now.
It is impossible, I think. But it's... And that's a vicious cycle in and of itself. Is, I mean, the industry at the bicycle level seems to just each week be getting closer to direct to consumer only. But I mean, all the stuff we're talking about, I don't understand how that's supposed to work.
Yeah, it doesn't mesh. You can't make things more complicated progressively and be more hands-off at the same time. It just doesn't compute,
Right. Yeah,
I mean,
right, Brad.
we're conflicted though, because you want cycling to evolve. We should be happy that cycling is constantly evolving, but it seems like a lot of times it's evolving for somewhat no purpose, or it's a very minute purpose that's very niched out that seems to sweep across. Like we were just talking a couple of weeks ago about how 35.4 is the new OD on mountain bike bars, and that's coming across the board. It's like just because it was good for downhill bikes doesn't mean that we need all our cross country bikes with 35.4 bars. It's and that's been what just in my cycling career that's changed. This is at least the third time. So.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
But,
well, one of the things that I like to, another thing, I'm a historical guy, if you haven't figured it out
same
by now, but yeah, one of the things that I like to remind a lot of people that are younger about is that in the 1800s, the late 1800s and the early 1900s, cycling was the cutting edge technology of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a patent office in Washington, D.C., that was a huge building, and it housed all the patents for bicycles, and they had another building for everything else.
Wow.
So that's how intense the technology, and you have to think too that this stuff just doesn't pop out of nowhere. You had the brightest minds in math and science working on bicycle technology, like it was NASA, right? We have to think of it in those terms. And they wrote reams of books. I actually have seen some of them where the calculus and the trigonometry is so intense, I can't even figure it out. I mean, there's no way. So the brightest minds were doing this stuff back then. So when we think about the chain, for instance, the chain was developed for tricycles originally so women could ride modestly because it was a Victorian era and they all had to wear dresses and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's why trikes came around. So to make a trike work, you had to have chain. So they had to figure out how to make a chain really efficient. And they did such a good job that you can't make it better than it is. So this was figured out in the late 1800s. So a lot of times we, in our pride, think, well, we're smarter than those people were then. Well, maybe not so much. Math is math and science is science, right?
Sure.
So physics are physics. So you don't change the laws of physics. They are what they are. So I think that sometimes we have to step back and go, these little micro changes and things that you see bicycle companies doing now, that's all the room they have to innovate. Everything was so innovated out by the early 1900s that you couldn't really do it any better than that.
Yeah.
So the only problem that they had back then was they were too smart for their britches. They didn't have the materials to do it. They didn't have the technology and materials to do it.
Right.
So all these ideas existed back then, but they just couldn't do it. Now we have materials technology. That's where modern day technology comes in. So you have 3D printing, you have bearing technology that's way better than what they had then. So they can actually make things work that they designed back then. So you get these patent books and look at them from the early 1900s. You're like, wow, there's a dual suspension bike.
Yeah.
But they didn't do it because it would have been heavy and it would have been, not capable of doing what they originally had intended it to do. Now we can do it.
Yeah, there was no Cashman coating back then.
Yeah, right. So we look at where we're at with bicycles. We're just realizing the ideas that came up back then now.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of really fascinating to me about the whole bicycle industry is that the materials technology is where it's at. So
and CAD design and all that stuff too. Yeah. And machining and CNCing and milling and everything down to the spec.
Able to get the tolerances down to the thousandth, no problem sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it, like I said, it's a conflicting thought. We're glad. I mean, I'm glad that cycling is constantly evolving, but it's it seems like a lot of people are getting left behind.
Yeah, absolutely, they are. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not I'm not a proponent of cycling just becoming stagnant by any means, because there's been a lot of good innovations over the years. I mean, and what's funny is we evolved, and then we tend to go back, like all cycles started as single speed, and then we, got to where we're running triple front rings. And, now most of the bikes that, except for the occasional road bikes and stuff, all come with a single front ring and a much bigger cluster on the rear, So,
Right.
And then you still have a pretty decent single speed contingent out there. It's pretty nichey, but people that are single speeders are single speeders,
Right.
So, and then, suspension got highly evolved, and then there's still people out there that are full rigid. That's their jam. The technology is not necessary unless you're at the very top level.
I was just going to say, my concern, you talked about people getting left behind. So that's my concern now.
Yep.
This kind of goes back to what you were talking about with consumer direct stuff, and how can they do that when things are getting more complicated. And I think that's becoming an issue, and will be an issue going forward, because a lot of the industry, not all of the bike industry, but a lot of the bike industry is trying to make bikes into devices.
Yes.
And with electronics and so on and so forth, and trying to get people into ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, when you turn a bicycle into something like that, then it gets very technical and very complicated real fast.
Yeah.
And it becomes very proprietary real fast. And that's exclusionary. That's exclusionary technology, because it's going to leave certain people behind.
Yeah.
No matter what you try to do there. And that's not what we want to see as an overall picture for the bicycle industry. What we want to see is, and this is my opinion, I'll say this is what I'd like to see, is less cars, more bicycles.
Hell yes.
Because I think that's going to benefit everything, know. And we're not going to get there if we keep trying to turn bicycles into devices and electronics and making it so complicated that the average person can't live with it unless they have a tech person supporting them at the bike shop.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. We need that single speeder. We need that simple bike. We need those not proprietary parts, today more than ever, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I remember as a kid, your front wheel would mess up. You'd take a wheel off of one of your buddy's old bikes, and just put it on, and it wasn't an issue. Yeah. Nowadays, you can't even come close to that. But if I was a young entrepreneur nowadays, like, in my mid-20s, if you could make a ton of money if you lived in a metropolitan area by being a traveling mechanic, just being a house call mechanic, if you had all the tools.
I mean, just around here, there's been a bunch that have given it a shot. And
but I think nowadays
they've come and gone.
Yeah.
I don't know. Then I guess that's kind of what I'm struggling with on the future of cycling, particularly the catering to the newer customer. And either of you, if I'm off base here, feel free to tell me I'm an idiot, because my wife tells me that multiple times a day. The newer rider, the newer to cycling, like Mark was touching on, it's perceived that carbon and lighter is better. They don't know any better. They don't know what they don't know.
Sure.
And so it's real easy to get caught up in here's a $2,200 mail order bike that's going to be shipped to my house, and they say all I got to do is torque the handlebar on, but they don't even have a torque wrench to begin with.
Right.
sort of thing. So the picture's being painted that this is simple and easy to do, and there's no perception that you need that expertise involved. And that's my big concern, and that's at the hardware level with the bikes themselves. But it's also a concern of mine at the riding level, the perception. And Mark, you and I have spoken about this before. There's people that are getting mail order bikes that are multi-$1,000, $2,000 to $3,000 generally. I think is kind of the entry point for most these days for those mail order direct bikes. And I have a state-of-the-art gravel bike now. So I I had this bike dropped off at my house. I'm ready to go do 200 miles of Unbound Gravel, and I've never ridden a bike before.
Yeah. Well, you got a lot of things going on there. If you're at that level and you're stepping out and buying a $2,200, $2,500 bike and having it delivered to your house and you don't have a game plan for that, I'd say shame on you almost.
I would,
you know?
well, I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That's my perception is how the industry is pitching the market right now.
Yeah.
You don't blame that on the customers per se. Or am I off base there, Mark? Do you see that trend as well, or is that just something I'm imagining?
Well, there's a lot of that goes on. Okay, so for instance, the gravel scene has exploded, as we all know, numbers wise, events wise, over the last 10 years. And you go just to tease out a particular event in Kansas where it rained the night before it, and then people went out and destroyed their bikes in the mud because they didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Right. That's the only thing I can think of is, these people wanted their entry fee back because they didn't know any better. They did that. They either went down to the bike shop or had a bike delivered to them and put it together and thought they were going to do 200 miles of gravel out of I don't know, thin air, I guess, and didn't do their research. And, as a person who's been around the block a few times in this gravel scene, I look at that and go, well, duh. You can't just ride through clay mud road like that and expect your bike to survive it.
Right.
But they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know what they don't know. So there's a level of education that needs to happen on many levels. So not just we've been talking about bike mechanics and stuff like that, but people assume because we're an order from Amazon society, and COVID kind of pushed us big time over that edge.
That's a fair point.
We're at that point now where we expect the truck to pull up to the house and drop off something we can just unbox and use.
Yeah.
And that's the expectation of a lot of young people now. So, it's going to be an education. I mean, I see all the time on the mechanics forum on Facebook where the mechanics are complaining because somebody brought a bike into the shop that they mail ordered in, and it's missing parts, or the parts are installed incorrectly, or there's failures because they weren't designed the way they should have been. And I mean, this is a constant theme on that page. And, whose fault is that? I mean, it's not the customer's fault. They don't know any better, right?
Yeah.
They need to be educated. We need to maybe crack down on some of these, consumer direct things and be more stringent on quality controls and things like that. I mean, there's lawsuits for some of these e-bike companies now because their bike designs are maybe lacking in some areas. So we're going to have hiccups. We're going to have problems. We're going to have issues with mail order. Well, I call it mail order, but it's really online, direct to consumer. That you can tell how old I am. Mail order like NASCAR.
I bet you looked at a Sears Roebuck catalog somewhere along the way.
Yeah. But and that's always been a thing. But now it's a really big thing because so many people do that. They consume that way now.
Yeah.
And so the local bike shops and the mobile mechanics are pulling their hair out because there's more of that going on than ever. And then you get the cottage industry guys, like you kind of brought that up, a young person who could become a mobile mechanic. You just take the example of e-bikes in New York City where they've got these cottage industry folks that are trying to rebuild batteries, and they have all these apartment fires because of it. And New York City's having to crack down on that. And, because people are getting injured and dying because of these fires, because there's not any way for people to get their e-bike going again in New York City without that kind of support. And so these things pop up, to fill that vacuum. And whose fault is that? Well, it is what it is, and on a lot of levels, because we aren't prepared in education. We aren't prepared in service areas. Things are just happening at breakneck speeds, and we're filling in the gaps with not such great solutions. So part of that reaches us in the gravel world with folks that buy these bikes and show up, and they haven't done their research into how these events go, and what the whole ethos of these events are and their equipment and on and on and on. So
Yeah, but everybody
There's a lot
deserves
of-
that on their first gravel ride. You know, everybody
Yeah.
everybody needs a healthy dose of that, showing up and not knowing what the hell's going on.
A reality
Yeah.
check. Now, Mark, you had mentioned that
Yeah.
you might have been around the block a few times, and again, for the people that may not be up to speed on the history of Guitar Ted, you had a pretty big block at the beginning of what has now become the gravel scene. Could you
Yeah.
kind of give the quick rundown of maybe an event you might be known for and what it led to overall? Or
Sure.
Please do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, basically, myself and another gentleman by the name of Jeff Kirchhoff, who helps run Ergon USA right now out in Colorado. We used to work next to each other as bike mechanics. And this is a story you may not have ever heard before, Kevin. But our boss at the time, we used to brag about this feat that they pulled off in 1980. He and 3 other guys rode across the state of Iowa on road bikes in a day. And the reason they did that was because they got tired of hearing all the people who did rag riding saying it was such a great accomplishment. They took 7 days to ride across the state, and they said, well, we can do that in a day, you know. So they got together and they did this purported ride across the state in a day, and they were successful. And he used to brag about that to us all the time. And Jeff and I got real tired of hearing the story. And finally, one day after hearing it for the umpteenth millionth time, Jeff looks at me and goes, "Well, we could do that on mountain bikes across the state. You know, that'd be cool." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be a neat idea." And he goes, "Well, do you think you could do that on gravel roads across the state?" And I go, "Yeah, I think that could be a possibility," having some background in the country, and I kind of understood that there were gravel roads everywhere. And so he looked at me, he goes, "Well, we're going to do it." And I'm like, "We're going to do what?" And he developed this idea for a race, and I helped him out with that. And so Trans Iowa was born in late 2004. We put the word out. In 2005, we ran the first one, and it was a hit. And we had a bunch of guys show up at that first one on cyclocross bikes, and they were like, "This is really a road event. It's not really a mountain bike event." And we kind of looked at that and agreed to that, but we let anybody bring whatever bike they wanted because there weren't gravel bikes in 2005, obviously.
Right.
And that's where it started growing. We had people getting a hold of us and asking us how we did this. That's such a great idea. And of course, the internet was a big part of that then, and the idea took off. And next thing you know, people are riding gravel all over the place and putting on events. And you know, Trans Iowa was kind of the domino that started the whole thing. Jeff and I always say that we dropped a pebble in a pool, and the ripples went out and affected everything eventually. So
Yeah, I remember.
Trans Iowa was that pebble.
I remember reading about it and hearing about it and everything, and people were like, "What are they doing up there?" You know. And just for some context, Mark, what's the distance on Trans Iowa for those that are just listening that aren't as in depth as we are?
So the state of Iowa is approximately 310, 320-ish miles, depends on where you cross it, from
Right.
east to west. And so we decided that we would actually physically do that point to point in the beginning. So our first course, I think, we got talked into ending in the Decorah, which was actually short of the eastern border. So I think our first course was 310 miles. But eventually Trans Iowa became a loop course because logistically it just made way more sense for everybody.
Yeah.
And we were anywhere from 320 to 340 miles, depending on the year, because the course changed every year for 14 years. So.
Yeah. Very cool.
And Trans Iowa is no longer, or is
No, I did. Yeah, I did the last one in 2018 and decided to retire from putting on events in 2020. And so there's some folks that decided that Trans Iowa is such a great idea, it should survive. The idea should survive, and so they started an event in 2019 and called it Iowa Wind and Rock. It's essentially Trans Iowa V2
Okay.
version 2. They do pretty much everything the way I did it, but they just it's a different name, and they're building their own legacy and things. So you can still do that sort of an event if that appeals to you. It's usually around 330 miles. You got to do it in 34 hours or less. And you have
that's a
time
weird
limit.
time frame. Where does the 34 hours come from?
10 miles an hour is my guess.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it's because Jeff and I had jobs.
Oh.
We didn't want to have to take any time off to put this thing on, so we decided that, hey, we got to get going on Saturday morning. We got to get home by Sunday night, so we got 34 hours. Right? So that's what we figured we could parse out the people to get it done in, and we wanted to have a time limit, you know.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Jeff came from a background of 24-hour racing, so there was a hard time limit there.
Yeah.
So he understood that, and we also didn't want to have volunteers standing around forever waiting for someone to finish in 3 days or whatever it might take somebody to finish.
Have you met my friend Peter?
A running joke of ours. Actually, Peter's done a lot of Spinistry events. He's done a lot of events all over the country.
Yeah.
He was actually the Unbound XL unofficial last place finisher.
Lantern Rouge.
This year that got a lot of indirect press for, finishing a day and a half or 2 days after the official cutoff. But it's a running joke of ours. Now, along those lines, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe my understanding of the timeline is incorrect, but my understanding is it was the Trans Iowa that basically people that went to that were from the Emporia area and started what's now the biggest gravel event in the world. Or am I off base on my history?
No, you're right. As soon as we put the word out, we had, like I mentioned before, we had people emailing us, like, what is this? This sounds really, really rad. And so one of those people was Joel Dyke, who became one of the co-founders of Dirty Cans at 200. He and Jim Cummins decided that would be kind of a cool idea for them down there because they realized they had really cool gravel roads.
Yeah, they do.
And, of course, they were influenced a little bit by the old Flint Hills Death Ride. They knew about that. And I think Jim had even participated in that one. So they had some ideas that this could be something, right? So they sent Joel up for the first two Trans Iowas, actually. And he came up as kind of a participant / researcher, just to see how we were doing things and how it was going to be received and whether that would be something that they should pursue in Kansas. Well, he came back from that with rave reviews, and Jim and he decided to go ahead and announce that they were going to do something. And during this time, they were in fairly constant communication with Jeff and I about ideas and how to set it up and whatnot. And so in 2006, they put on their first event, and I was actually a participant in that. So I went down and helped support that.
Was it called Dirty Kansas back then?
Yep.
Okay.
It was originally. But they originally had a different name for it. They weren't going to call it that originally, but they were going to call it the Kansas 200, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought I remembered.
They switched up gears at the last minute and decided to go with Dirty Kansas, which is ironic because why they got rid of the name, because originally they did that to honor the Native Americans and the fact that they were riding on dirt roads. They just put the two things together.
Right.
So, whatever. I don't want to get into that story, but
yeah,
that's all politically driven. I think it's crazy, but anyway.
There's other pieces to that maybe someday over a campfire and a bottle of Old Crow we'll talk about.
It's just
some of
posturing. That's all
there
it
you
is.
Go.
Well, actually, so now you're going down that road, and I'm just going to throw this in because it just kind of struck me this way for the first time. This makes me proud to say that indirectly, our first event came about because of a friend of mine that went to, I don't think it was the 2006, I think it was 2007, I believe, Dirty Kansas. And I was riding gravel roads myself, and he came back and talked about a bunch of people doing that event, and eventually that led to us doing our first Spinistry event in 2010, the Red River Riot, which because it was like I knew I was riding gravel roads and having a good time on that. I didn't think anybody else in the world would.
Yeah. When
I got that feedback about this event in Kansas, which was a byproduct of the Trans Iowa, I kind of consider Spinistry and the Red River Riot the illegitimate grandchild of Guitar Ted at this point, to be honest with you. So that makes me feel good. Okay. Not that you're my grandfather, because I'm pretty sure we're pretty close in age. But
yeah, probably.
That goes to
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say that what you're saying right there, Kevin, illustrates my point perfectly when I say that Trans Iowa was that pebble that dropped in the pool, and you're one of the ripples, right? So you got affected by that, and so did a lot of other people all over the world now. And so, I mean, it's kind of ironic when I hadn't talked to Jeff Kirchhoff for, face to face for probably over a decade. And then this past spring, he was down there for the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame thing, and I was as well. And there was a ride, and he showed up for it. And we met each other on Commercial Street there in Kansas, and on Emporia, Kansas. And he looked at me and he said, "Would you have ever imagined this would have happened the way it did?" And I said, "There's no way. There's no way I would have ever imagined this." So I thought we were just two crazy nutbags with a nutty idea that maybe a few people would like it.
Yeah. And
they'd forget about it, right?
Yeah. And thank goodness you were nutty.
We look at it now and we're like amazed. So.
Yeah.
Now that's the perfect segue, and that's where I was going a minute ago. Mark is a first round inductee into the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame, and for darn good reason. When I first heard about the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame, I'm going to admit I'm one of those that's like, do we really need this sort of thing? But in turn, I wasn't bashing it, so I don't want it to come across that way. But the first person I reached out to was Mark, and the second person was Bobby Wintle. And it's like, is this legit? Is this a real deal, or is this a lifetime marketing move, or what is this? And
it's more of a placeholder in time.
Mark, can you kind of just give us an outline of what the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame is from your perception, and the validity of it, and what it means and what it should mean?
Yeah. So it's kind of the brainchild of Leland Danes, who is arguably somebody who should also be in the Hall of Fame, but isn't yet. I think at some point in time he will be. But Leland is right now is the head of Emporia Downtown, their community-driven group there that helps promote Emporia events and things. But he was around the DK 200 early on and was a big fan of riding gravel roads, and it became part of the race directors that put on the event eventually. And so he's well versed in the history and the importance of gravel racing. So the idea came from him. He and a few other people on the board decided that it was time. The time was right, because if they didn't do it now, a lot of those stories and influences and artifacts of the early gravel scene were going to disappear. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier, Kevin, about how you had relatives that had a liquor store, and you wish they would have kept those old promotional items for, obviously they'd be collectible now, right? Well, that's part of the reason why the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame exists, is to collect these bits and pieces of the story, be they physical or in verbal form, in the forms of the people they're putting in, so that story doesn't get lost. So, like, you asked me, how did Trans Iowa start? Well, if I disappeared tomorrow and there wasn't a Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame, a lot of people would never know about it.
Yeah.
So but now we have ShiftLess, so everybody knows about it. All 33 of our listeners know about it.
There you go. So, but yeah, I think in the future, the danger is, and I think what part of the reason you were alarmed by the announcement of Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame and the danger of it is it becomes a popularity contest,
Yeah.
right? So who's popular in gravel right now? Let's put them in the Hall of Fame because everybody knows who they are. And you forget about the past. You don't
Yeah.
have any basis of where this came from. You know, these people are standing on the shoulders of a lot of other people, as I am. You know, and I like to try to recognize that as well. And the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame wants to be that entity that is a place people can go if they want to learn about where this all came from, where my influences were from, where people that came after me, where their influences are from, and how it got to be where it is today, which is now it's an international, professional segment of cycling. I mean, the UCI just held their Gravel National World Championships a weekend ago or so.
Yeah.
So, you know, where does that come from? You know, how did we get there? So this is what the Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame is, in my mind, supposed to be about.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. That's kind of what I was thinking. It's a placeholder in time, and you know, taking note of all the noteworthy aspects of the evolution of gravel and kind of telling the story along the way.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
and
so-
just to toot my own horn a little bit, but this also toots your horn, because again, this is the pedal and the ripple and so forth. Lauren Stevens was the top U.S. female finisher at the UCI World Championship last couple weekends ago. She finished 6th overall, pretty strong finish. But
Yeah.
I'm happy to say that her very first gravel event was one of ours.
Yeah.
But she also this
Nice.
year won the real gravel worlds, in my opinion, in Nebraska on
Yeah.
the female division.
Yeah.
And the ripples just keep on rippling. So
Is that still PCL Gravel Worlds?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think I made the mistake last week of mentioning Lauren's finish and just saying Gravel Worlds. I need to say UCI Gravel Worlds. Gravel Worlds is Pirate Cycling League as far
Yeah.
as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Is Corey still
Yeah,
at the
it's,
helm there? I think.
yeah, he and Craig Schmidt
Yeah.
and Jason Strobing, pretty much the principal fellows over there. Yeah.
Those guys are a lot of fun.
Although they have, yeah, they are. Yeah, I've known many of them for years, obviously. So they come to my events, and I've done theirs, and yeah, it's pretty neat what they've done over there. I really enjoy their event.
And that one has really blown up in the past couple of years. I mean, it's always been at the top of the heap sort of thing, but I think they've really taken their game to that next level, but still maintained their grassroots persona, which that's that's hard to do. There's no doubt about it, but I still think they're under, what's the best way to say it? This is my biggest concern with the gravel scene right now, is the perception that in the popular media or the cycling media that to do gravel you have to do these huge production events. You have to show up for those huge production events. You have to pay $300 entry fees
Yeah.
and things like that. At the national press level, Gravel Worlds does get mentioned. Mid-South does get mentioned, but there's, I don't know, and maybe it's my own misperception of it. I don't think they get their due. I don't think the independent grassroots events get their due in the cycling press. It seems like it's always the same 5 or 6 things that these are the standards.
It's all
like,
lifetime.
I didn't take it that simplistically.
Well, you know me, I call a spade a spade. But people like PCL, they don't give a shit, you know? They're doing it for the true love of the sport. And I think when you get to a true grassroots level, guys like Corey and those guys that have been, I mean, hell, they've been putting on Gravel Worlds for 15, 18 years. You know, and they didn't, just like when you said just a minute ago, Mark, when you were standing there next to your buddy and you're like, did you ever think that this was going to happen like this? That's not the reason you did it. You did it because you had a crazy idea, you thought it would be fun, and you thought maybe 20 20 people would do it with you, and it just evolved after that.
Yep.
You know, and
Yep.
you weren't looking for accolades. You weren't looking to be in the gravel cycling Hall of Fame. I mean, didn't even know it was going to exist. You know, and I think those are the people that really do deserve the accolades. But the ironic thing is they don't give a shit, you know, and that's what makes them even more genuine. And Kevin's the same thing. He put on his first event because of, like you said, I mean, you know, he was a ripple that was caused by your little harebrained idea back in the day too. And he didn't think it was going to be anything more than just one event. And then as soon as the first event was over, everybody was like, when are we going to do this again? And that's how it started, you know? Yeah. So I think, you know. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of that there's two worlds in gravel, right? That's what we're talking about. There's the professional level.
Absolutely.
And then there's everything else.
Yeah.
And so I don't mind that there's a professional level of gravel. That's fine, you know. And I get where you're coming from, Kevin, because I felt the same thing about how traditional cycling media likes to pick up that narrative of the professional level, and that's all there is.
Right.
But let's keep in mind that there's an internet, right? And there's people like us right now talking about that's not all there is. And there's a lot more people than us saying that's not all there is. So it's not 1995 when that kind of narrative could rule the day and nobody else would know any better. Now people know better.
That's true.
So I think that both things will be able to exist and thrive and be okay. So what do we really have here is what I like to say is there's gravel worlds on the UTI level, which is a one-day thing, and a single person in the male and female side get to wear a rainbow jersey. Okay, great.
Yeah.
You know, that's those two people, and it's that one day, right? Then there's the gravel world, or universe, if you want to say. And I think that's what Gravel World PCL Lincoln, Nebraska represents.
Yeah.
Because they're more concerned about celebrating everybody.
Everyone.
Yeah.
The guy who comes in last, the guy who's in the middle. They have pros there. They celebrate them as well, which is great. They want everybody to feel important and have a good time and, you know, walk away with some kind of satisfaction that they did the right thing by going to that event. So that, to me, represents the world of gravel. So when I think of Gravel World PCL in Lincoln, Nebraska, I think of they're representing everything else beyond the professional level that the UCI only represents for a day. And then every once in a while you might see somebody with a rainbow jersey. Okay, great. They did something on a certain day, you know? So that's the way I like to differentiate the two things. And that's why I think they can live side by side, and I think that's fine.
Yeah. I see grassroots as more of a celebration, and the pro events are more of a just straight up competition, you know? There's I mean, I get that there's camaraderie within the pro level, you know, but there's not as much of a celebration type scene. You know, it's you know, and we won't even get into the term the spirit of gravel and all that, but
right at the bottom of my list
oh
here.
yeah. Oh shit, I wasn't reading your notes. I promise I wasn't cheating off your homework. But I do have one question that I'm going to steer us a little bit away from all this for just a second, because I keep having this question. And so in Texas, we've experienced a recession of gravel, if you will. A lot of our good gravel has gone away, and much like you said, the better gravel is closer to towns. Like our gravel that was closest to towns is the stuff that's going away, so we have to go further and further and further to reach at least consecutive hits of gravel that we can string together. Do you find the same thing happening up where you are, or is gravel a necessary infrastructure that's there to stay?
Both.
Yeah.
If I could say a simple answer. But no, there's definitely urban creep for sure.
Yeah.
For instance, there was some sections of one of my Trans-Iowa courses when I decided I wanted to circumnavigate Des Moines. There's certain sections of that course that are paved now or are gone completely.
Yeah.
And that's only been 5 or 6 years, you know. So we're definitely losing sections of gravel. We're definitely getting certain sections of our dirt roads are being turned into gated sea level roads, which we're not supposed to be riding on.
Yeah.
So there's some of that goes on, but in Iowa for sure, agriculture rules the day. I mean, over 90% of our land is in farming, and so those farm access roads are a necessary thing, and they're not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And when you talk about pavement versus gravel in Iowa, you're talking. There's about 46,000 miles of pavement in Iowa, and there's about 70,000 miles of dirt and gravel in Iowa. So they're not going to pave all that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. So even though we have scads of paved roads here, we're always going to have that gravel road action that we can easily access here. And I know that's not the case in every state. I get it.
It's
not
definitely
every
not.
state
Yeah.
is agricultural and it has that kind of access, but I think everybody has the back roads, the abandoned roads, the service roads, all that stuff are things that fall under the banner of gravel. That's one of my greatest regrets in this whole thing is that the bikes got called gravel bikes, and gravel, quote unquote, is what we're doing. I mean, yeah, a lot of us ride on crushed rock roads, but there's other stuff too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And these bikes are good for all that other stuff, and I kind of regret the fact that it got called gravel, because you think back to fat bikes.
Yeah.
Well, we call fat bikes now because originally we were calling them snow bikes, and then nobody wanted to buy them.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to ride in the snow.
Right.
Are you crazy? It's
Right.
cold. Well, these bikes are good for all kinds of stuff. Well, the industry quickly changed the narrative.
They called them flotation bikes for a little bit. There was a brief stint where they called them flotation bikes.
Right. They had to get away from that moniker snow because it was killing the sales. So, unfortunately, gravel never got that. That chance to get away from it. So that's the one thing that
But it all came from people relegating, like you said earlier, cross bikes onto gravel because they were more suited because they could take bigger tires. You could run something with a tread pattern instead of just a slick. And then somebody just said, well, that's suited for gravel. And they just started calling everything that had a narrow treaded tire on it a gravel bike. And what's funny is cross bikes back then didn't even have bosses on them. You couldn't even run a bottle cage on them. So,
not a real cross bike. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty wild, but like you said, you can run them on anything. I used to run. It's an even more niche bike, but it's a monster cross that was made by Willits back in the day, and that thing.
Oh yeah,
that thing is. I used to call it my ramble bike because you could take it on pavement, on trail, on it didn't matter, gravel, whatever. And so we do a ride out of my house every Sunday, and it's called a ramble. And that's the whole premise is we hit as many surfaces as we can possibly hit. It's not relegated to just gravel or just pavement or just trail or whatever. Right. So I get where you're saying.
That's a great name for the bike.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, so that's actually even a trend in an event. So you look at something like in Arkansas, they had that event Rule of Three. I don't know if you heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they picked up that idea up here in Iowa, and they have Core 4.
Yeah.
Which is another. It's actually the biggest competitive cycling event in Iowa in its second year.
Oh, wow.
They got like 800 people to show up for it this year, which blows everything else away that it happens in this state.
Wow.
So multi-surface rambles, if you will.
Yeah.
I think that's a trend now that you may start seeing more and more of that kind of thing, because like you mentioned earlier, we were having trouble stringing together sections of gravel. Well, there are sections of gravel.
Right.
Can we string them together with single track? Can we string them together with paved road that's not so busy? Can we, what can we do? So I think that's where this idea of multi-surface rambles, if you will, I love that term, could come into play with more events across the country in places that don't have access to gravel like we do, here in Iowa. So,
and I think it's appealing.
I can totally see that.
I think it's more appealing across the board too, because you know, even people that are road people that dabble in single track or dabble in gravel, you know, it appeals to them. And then people that are strictly trail and ride pavement occasionally, it works for them too. You know, it's
Right.
it's a
Right.
and it's going to become a necessary evil as, I mean, gravel decides to become fewer and far between, like you were saying. But what's the other?
And I like that idea. Yeah.
What's the other race there that's in Iowa? Is it Spotted Pony? What's it called?
Horse.
Spotted Horse. Yeah, I knew I was going to mess that up. And it.
No, that's a gravel event. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yep.
You guys have a lot of
put on
cool
by
events.
the same people. That's done by the same people who put on Iowa Wind and Rock now.
Oh, okay. Very
Yep.
cool. Very cool. Yep. And I wish you guys were closer. It's quite a hike from Texas.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'd love to come down and do some of your events as well,
dude. You're more than welcome. It's quite a hike. I mean, we can literally, from where we are, we can drive 12 hours and still be in Texas. You know.
Oh, I know. I know, because my wife is from El Paso, so I'm well aware. I've been down there several times.
Does she know Mike Baker?
No, I don't.
He's from El Paso, you know.
Sorry,
Okay.
running joke. But yeah, El Paso is the perfect example of if you've been to El Paso, you know how big Texas is, because you can't get there from here.
Yeah. Yeah, you better pack a sack lunch to get there.
Our kids were always would be exasperated because we get into Texas and then we leave Texas to go to Texas.
Yeah.
So we cut across the panhandle and go into New Mexico.
Cut the corner.
So,
Yeah.
All right, Mark. Well, I think we've taken up plenty of your time today. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of good information there. I appreciate it tremendously. Any final words of wisdom or anything that you were wanting to cover before we let you get to your day there?
Well, I just want to say I really appreciate you guys, this ministry. I appreciate, the culture that you guys have brought to gravel, which has been unique from the beginning. I mean, I've watched what you guys have done since 2010, and it's really fascinating and really encouraging to see how you do things down there. So I just encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing. I think you're doing a great thing, and I'm proud to have been on this podcast today and have this chance to get to know you a little better. So thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure, man. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Same here.
We're going to let you go now.
You're welcome.
Reach out anytime.
All right.
Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See you later.
All right.
Bye now.
Wow.
I like that one.
That was good. What a historian. I like the fact that he's got such a working knowledge of prior bikes, and when he started talking about bends of bottom bracket spindles, I was like, holy shit, I can see it. I can smell it. I can smell the oil coating on all of that stuff and wrapped in that wax paper. Like, I knew exactly what he was saying.
Well, I wasn't going to throw it in there because I was afraid it might come across as the well, I've got a better story than you, because that was not the intention at all. But when y'all start talking about rule of three, rambles, multi-surface rides, well, I want to remind you, and I want to thank you. This weekend we're doing all or nothing.
Yeah.
Due to your motivation to remind me to get back to my roots.
There you go.
So we're putting that one out this weekend. We got 160 something people signed up that I've seen so far, and
that makes me so happy.
So we're going to ramble our asses off this weekend.
Hell yes. That makes me super happy.
Well, should we roll on out of here?
I think we talked a lot about bikes today.
I think we covered bikes today.
Yep.